Good morning. I want to start with an appeal for tolerance. We all know that Brexit is a controversial subject. It excites strong passions. But as a party and as a country, we also need to keep a sense of proportion. Everybody had a vote. Most people have an opinion. But only a small minority think it's worth fighting over, except when they're on Twitter. It's important to remember that the person sitting next to you, on the bus into town, at your desk at work, round the breakfast table, and yes, here in this hall today, may have voted the other way to you in the referendum. That's the genius of our democracy. We express our differences at the ballot box, but afterwards we come together and respect the result. When it comes to wanting what's best for Britain, we're all on the same side. As someone who campaigned to leave, not only do I respect the opinions of those who wanted us to stay in the EU, I'd go further. I think they made some important arguments and highlighted some difficulties that some on my side were too quick to dismiss. Disentangling our laws, our institutions, our economy from Brussels after more than 40 years of EU membership was never going to be entirely straightforward or risk-free. To rise to the challenge, we'll need some unity of purpose, and I believe we're at our best when we work together to forge something bigger than the sum of our parts, as a government, as a party, and as a country. For my part, I'm lucky to have a brilliant ministerial team with Martin Callanan, Robin Walker, Suella Braverman, and Chris Eaton-Harris working tirelessly to deliver the very best Brexit we can. And the reason I accepted the Prime Minister's offer to join the Cabinet is because my approach to Brexit is pragmatic, not dogmatic. Do I think the deal we're pursuing is perfect? Of course not. Is it everything I wanted? No, it isn't. This is a negotiation. There have been compromises. We're not decoupling or as quickly or as completely as some would like. And we've been prepared to accept certain EU requirements in order to secure our own interests. I've been back and forth to Brussels negotiating the details of our withdrawal agreement and the framework for our future relationship. The vast majority of the withdrawal agreement has been settled, although we've still got some tricky issues outstanding, and we're making good progress on the future relationship. We've been reasonable. Some say too reasonable. But our proposals would deliver a historic agreement that provides a roadmap out of the EU and a final deal that will be good for the whole country. A deal that delivers on the referendum, because that's our democratic duty. A deal that manages the risks of Brexit, because that's our responsibility. And a deal that grasps the opportunities of Brexit, because we're at our best when we're optimistic about the future. And a deal that protects our precious union, because we are the Conservative and Unionist Party. To those of my fellow Eurosceptic colleagues who think it's not good enough, I'd just say this. If I'd have told you 3 years ago that we were going to end free movement, stop the vast annual budget contributions, leave the single market, get out of the customs union, pursue an independent trade policy, make Parliament supreme, protect the union, exit the common fisheries policy, and ditch the common agricultural policy, you'd have bitten my arm off. If the EU match our ambition and our pragmatism, that's what our proposals will deliver. I said if the EU matches our ambition and our pragmatism. Unfortunately, that wasn't on display at Salzburg. Our Prime Minister has been constructive and respectful. In return, we heard jibes from senior leaders. And we saw a starkly one-sided approach to negotiation, where the EU's theological approach allows no room for serious compromise. And yet we're expected to cast aside the territorial integrity of our own country. If the EU want a deal, they need to get serious, and they need to do it now. At the same time, as in any negotiation, we will listen to the alternative ways of delivering on the strategic criteria we've set out, because a good deal is the best outcome for everyone. But our willingness to compromise is not without limit. We're leaving the EU in fact, not just in name. If we can't obtain a deal that secures that objective, if an attempt is made to lock us in via the back door of the EEA or the customs union, if the only offer from the EU threatens the integrity of our union, then we will be left with no choice but to leave with no deal. That's why the whole of the machinery of government is busy preparing for a no-deal scenario. Not because we want it, not because we think it's likely, but because it might happen. Some people say that no deal is unthinkable. Wrong. What is unthinkable is that this government or any other British government could be bullied by the threat of some kind of economic embargo into signing a one-sided deal against our country's interests. Now, when it comes to no deal, we've heard some pretty lurid predictions from the prophets of doom. They claim planes will be grounded, the ports will be blocked. Let's have some common sense here. Why on earth would any of those things happen unless someone decided to make them happen? Even if we can't secure a comprehensive deal with the EU, I have to say I find it hard to believe they would, for narrow political reasons, seek to punish Britain in such a crass and counterproductive way, threatening European as well as UK businesses and jobs. But if I'm wrong about that, it's hardly an attractive argument for those suggesting we should stay in the club. The reality? Yes, there are risks and potential short-term disruption, but we'll deal with them and any other problems that might arise in the no-deal scenario in a calm and sensible manner, as we've already started to set out with our 77 technical notices from aviation to car insurance. But beyond all the complexities of Brexit, one thing must be sacrosanct: democracy itself. Two years ago, we had a referendum in which more people voted than at any time before or since. Like any national vote, there were claims and counterclaims and plenty of controversy. It was ever thus. Democracy is rough-edged, not clean-cut. But one thing was crystal clear, and we all know it in our hearts. It was even written on that government leaflet that was sent out to every household. Let me just remind you what it said. This is your decision. The government will implement what you decide. Well, we did decide. It was close, but it was clear. Britain voted to leave the EU. Respecting the result, that's the essence of our democracy. And I have to say, I'm heartened by the fact that the majority of those who voted to remain have accepted the referendum verdict. For them, the integrity of our democracy is far more important than winning or losing on any one individual issue. But I'll tell you what's not democracy. the efforts of a small but influential group of senior politicians and establishment figures to overturn the result of the referendum. They want to stop us leaving. You can just picture them sitting in an expensive advertising agency discussing how to claim that black is white. Our research shows that the public doesn't like the idea of a second referendum. That's all right. We'll rebrand it a people's vote. They might buy that. But there's a real sense that leave one fair and square. Most people just want to get on with it. Don't worry. We'll bankroll a campaign to scare the wits out of them. Hang on. All that Project Fear stuff didn't work too well first time around. That's because it wasn't scary enough. This time, we'll claim that no deal will mean patients won't get their medicines, mobile phone roaming charges will go through the roof, debris will fall from the sky. Honestly, it would be pathetic if it wasn't so dangerous. And under Jeremy Corbyn, the Labour Party has now opened the door to reversing Brexit. A clear breach of their manifesto promise, a deliberate tactic to weaken the negotiating position of the UK for their own narrow political gain. Just imagine for a moment if they succeeded. Trust in our democracy would all but vanish. Most people, whether they voted Leave or Remain, would see it for what it is. A shameless ruse by an establishment that thinks it has the right to keep asking the same question until it gets the answer it wants. And who would benefit? If there's mass disillusionment with the system, then it's the populists, the far left, the alt-right, who will reap the reward, as they have in other countries where the establishment has ignored people's concerns, where voters have been told that their hopes and their fears are not important because the establishment knows best. And because of that, in many of those countries, it's the extremists who are on the march. That's where this kind of disdain for democracy leads. You don't think it could happen here? Just take a look at the Labour Party. A few years ago, the moderates of New Labour were in charge. We had our differences with Tony Blair and Gordon Brown, big differences. But there was also a shared understanding about the basic freedoms and tolerance that shore up our democracy and the civilised conduct of politics. Give or take a couple of punches from John Prescott. So what happened? Left-wing extremists, long confined to the margins, took their chance and took control of the Labour Party. Today, those extremists are led by Jeremy Corbyn and John McDonnell. They've captured the Labour Party lock, stock and barrel. And under the nose of Labour's leaders, they're using all the tools in the extremist armoury. Intimidation, fanaticism, scapegoating, especially against Jews. The cozying up to Holocaust deniers and terrorists, the casual equation of Jews with the Israeli government, the vicious abuse levelled at their own Jewish MPs. That a once great mainstream party should stoop so low is a stain on Britain. I say to Labour, you'd be surprised how many British people take this personally. They know things you choose to forget. 80 years ago, in 1938, Nazi Germany was invaded Czechoslovakia. The lucky few fled. some of them to Britain. One Jewish family arrived in England with a little boy called Peter. He was 6 years old and he spoke no English. That little boy grew up knowing that his grandmother, his grandfather, most of his relatives, the loved ones left behind, had been systematically murdered for no other reason than that they were Jews. That little boy learnt English. He got into a grammar school. He grasped the opportunities and embraced the tolerance that our great country has to offer. He became a food manager at Marks and Spencer. He married a clothes buyer, Church of England girl from Bromley. But he never forgot what happened to his family. That little boy was my father. And I will honour his memory by fighting the scourge of anti-Semitism and racism until my last breath. Because none of us can rest until Corbyn, McDonnell and their extremist gang have been driven back to the margins, where they belong. And none of us should give succor to Labour's political opportunism on Brexit, which has just one aim: to put Jeremy Corbyn in Downing Street. That's why we must come together over Brexit and recognise that what divides us is nothing compared to our struggle with the Labour Party. An epic struggle we must win, not just to defend people's jobs and livelihoods, but to preserve the free and tolerant democracy that we cherish in this country. Conference, it's time for us to stand together to make a success of Brexit, so that the United Kingdom goes from strength to strength. I know we can do it. I know we will do it, because I believe in the British people. I'm an optimist, not the rose-tinted kind. I'm a stubborn optimist who believes we breathe life into hope through the tenacity of our efforts. And I'm optimistic history will judge Brexit not on the tortuous haggle we're having with Brussels, but as a springboard to a buccaneering global embrace of free trade, to boost our amazing SMEs with wider export opportunities, to create the jobs of the future, to cut tariffs and reduce the cost of living for low and middle income families, and to give the poorest countries in the world their chance to trade and stand on their own 2 feet, the surest route to real economic independence. I'm optimistic because I see that Britain is a country bursting with talent, scientific talent, creative talent, entrepreneurial talent. We have a dynamic culture that takes the best of what we've got and mixes it with bold innovations in every field of endeavour. Our strength is that we keep producing and attracting amazing people who want to contribute to something bigger than themselves, to something bigger than the sum of its parts. That's why we're delivering Brexit. Yes, to control immigration and regain public trust in the system, but also to expand our global horizons so we attract the best and the brightest from around the world, to invent the next life-saving drug, to pioneer the next breathtaking technology, to help us write the next chapter in our history. Above all, I'm optimistic we will deliver Brexit faithful to the referendum, a springboard to democratic revival, to take back control over our own destiny, so that politicians like me never forget the humility that makes us accountable to all of you. We've had our arguments, but now is the time to put them behind us. Now is the time to come together, because this is a moment for the optimists, and ours is a country ready to shine. Thank you.